Rob Rhinehart literally poisoned himself with his own invention. The year was 2012, and this broke 24-year-old software engineer was sick of spending money and time on food. So he decided to do something absolutely insane: create a liquid meal replacement that would give him every nutrient his body needed. But what started as a simple experiment nearly killed him when his homemade formula became contaminated with dangerous levels of heavy metals. What lesson did this near-death experience teach him about the real cost of disruption? Rob Rhinehart wasn't your typical Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He was just a regular guy from Georgia who moved to San Francisco with big dreams and an empty wallet. Like most young programmers, he was surviving on ramen noodles and cereal, spending way too much money on food he barely had time to eat. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was in the most innovative city in the world, and he was still stuck with the same boring problem humans had dealt with for thousands of years: figuring out what to eat 3 times a day. Most people would just accept this reality and move on, but Rob had a different idea. What if food wasn't actually necessary? What if he could hack his own biology and create the perfect meal in liquid form? It sounds crazy now, but back then, Rob was convinced he could solve nutrition once and for all. He started researching every vitamin, mineral, and macronutrient the human body needed to survive. Then he began ordering raw ingredients online, mixing them together in his tiny apartment kitchen like some kind of mad scientist. The early versions were absolutely disgusting. We're talking thick, gritty, flavorless sludge that would make anyone gag. But Rob was determined to prove his theory worked. For weeks, he lived almost entirely on his homemade concoction. He called it Soylent after the science fiction movie, which should have been the first red flag. His friends thought he'd completely lost his mind. His roommates were convinced he was going to kill himself, and as it turned out, they weren't wrong. The problem was that Rob had no formal training in nutrition or chemistry. He was essentially conducting a dangerous experiment on his own body without any professional oversight. Some of the raw ingredients he was ordering contained trace amounts of heavy metals, like arsenic and lead. In small quantities, these might not cause immediate harm, but when you're consuming the same formula multiple times a day for weeks on end, those toxins start to build up in your system. Rob began experiencing symptoms he couldn't explain: severe fatigue, brain fog, digestive issues that got progressively worse. He was losing weight rapidly, but not in a healthy way. His skin looked pale and sickly. People who knew him started expressing serious concern about his appearance. But instead of stopping the experiment, Rob convinced himself these were just temporary side effects while his body adjusted to optimal nutrition. The wake-up call came when he finally got blood tests done. His heavy metal levels were dangerously high, particularly arsenic. The doctor who reviewed his results was alarmed and warned him that continued exposure could cause permanent organ damage or worse. Rob realized he'd been slowly poisoning himself in pursuit of the perfect meal. Most rational people would have thrown in the towel at this point. The whole idea seemed fundamentally flawed and potentially lethal. But Rob saw this setback differently. Instead of viewing it as proof that his concept was wrong, he treated it as a product development challenge that needed to be solved. The problem wasn't that meal replacement was impossible. The problem was that he needed better quality control and professional expertise. This near-death experience forced Rob to completely change his approach. He couldn't continue operating as a lone wolf experimenting in his kitchen. If he wanted to turn Soylent into a real company, he needed to bring in food scientists, nutritionists, and manufacturing experts who could help him create a safe, regulated product. When he finally launched Soylent publicly through a crowdfunding campaign, the response was incredible. Thousands of people were interested in the same solution Rob had been seeking: a convenient, nutritionally complete meal that could save them time and money. The campaign raised over $2 million, proving there was massive demand for his controversial product. But the success of Soylent wasn't really about the product itself. It was about Rob's willingness to continue pursuing his vision even after it nearly destroyed him. He could have easily walked away after poisoning himself and spent the rest of his life as a cautious software engineer. Instead, he used that terrifying experience as motivation to build something even better. The company Rob built around Soylent eventually became worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His meal replacement products are now used by millions of people around the world. He He proved that his original instinct was correct. There was a massive market for convenient nutrition, but he also proved something more important about entrepreneurship. The difference between successful founders and everyone else isn't that they avoid making dangerous mistakes, it's that they learn how to recover from those mistakes and use them as stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Rob's willingness to admit his approach was flawed, seek professional help, and completely rebuild his product from scratch was what separated him from other wannabe entrepreneurs who give up at the first sign of trouble. The key lesson for aspiring entrepreneurs is that your biggest failures often contain the seeds of your greatest successes, but only if you're humble enough to learn from them instead of repeating them.